who would like, there it is. Now we get verbal confirmation. Appreciate the transparency. Just in case you think of anybody who might be interested in hearing or watching the replay or joining the conversation, we will have it accessible on the Chamber website. I am honored and pleased to be here with you all as a member of the board for the Austin LGBT Chamber and also the co-chair for the ERG committee. It is such an honor to do this work alongside this dream team. So we have Heather, Casey, and Nicole here with us. We also have Cody, who is unable to be here, who's on our team, but this team has done a ton of work behind the scenes to get this program up and running. Just want to acknowledge the leadership of the folks in the house. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our phenomenal moderator for today, Nicole Taylor, who is just a DEI influencer and someone who's brought so much thoughtfulness to our team, and want to pass it to you to take it away.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for being here. Nicole Taylor, pronoun she, her. I will be so honored to be helping lead this discussion today. Want to just give a chance for our panelists to introduce themselves. Afterwards, we have a really great link that'll have everyone's full bios and ways for you to connect with them afterwards. But just starting off, I'm going to read across my screen. Neferiatiti, I would love for you to come off mute and just tell us your name, your organization, and then as this is the last day of Pride, I would love for everyone to share a takeaway from this Pride, something you learned, a favorite moment, and then we'll get through the rest of the panelists.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Well, I am Neferiatiti Holt. I am the Senior Manager of Diversity and Inclusion at EZCORP, and we are here in lovely Austin today. It's not too hot out. And one of the biggest takeaways was really learning about the origin of why the month exists. Some people think it's just parties and parades, but it's so much that happened with the riots and the celebration of that day. So it really got granular with the history, and I learned a whole lot about pride and allyship. So it's a great thing to learn and to advocate for.
Thank you, and I agree. Alan?
Hi there, I'm Alan, he, him, and I am a VP of Engineering at Silicon Laboratories, and I'm also the executive sponsor for Silicon Laboratories Pride at Silicon Laboratories ERG. I'm very proud of that, and we're very happy about all that. I would say I had a moment. I had a Pride moment. I went out to Dripping Springs, Texas, which is out west of Austin here, for their very first Pride Festival, the very first one they'd ever had there. And the pride that could be just felt in that crowd was just really inspiring. And I just walked away with feeling like the world is coming to a better place. So I was very happy about that.
That's a beautiful Pride moment. Thank you for sharing. Noelle?
Hi, everyone. I'm Noelle San Jose. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, or sha in Tagalog. I am representing George P. Johnson Experience Marketing Agency. I am the program manager for our DEI program and founder of our multicultural ERG EPIC, that stands for Empowered People, Inclusive Cultures. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from Pride is just the opportunity to engage with the LGBTQIA plus community. Cody, who's on the team of this chamber, was one of the leaders for GPJ and Project Network's Project Pride. So throughout the month, he brought in speakers, and I think the biggest takeaway was how much organizations have the opportunity to create that inclusion for the LGBTQ community, and especially for trans folks. So really want to give him a shout out for putting that together and really putting a spotlight on especially trans issues this year. So thank you.
Thank you. And Cody is amazing. I know it's recorded, so he can hear it all he likes today. Tom? Oh, I'm so sorry. I see Tom.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. My name is Tom Ogletree, he, him. I am Vice President of External Affairs and Social Impact at General Assembly, where I am also proud to be the executive sponsor of the LGBTQIA+ Employee Resource Group. I'm also an advisory board member for the Ali Forney Center, which is a New York-based nonprofit that works with LGBTQIA+ homeless youth, providing them with social services, education, training, and pathways to getting off the streets and into great jobs. I think for me, our country's long overdue reassessment of our relationship with the systemic racism of our history last year, I think helped to move some of the conversations around, I think, within our community, within the LGBTQIA community, about intersectionality, but also some of the problematic history that we have even within our own community around, how we think about, connecting across, lived experiences, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender identity. And I think hopefully that can really lead to continued productive dialogue going forward. And I hope can be also a point that we can engage with somewhat today. So thank you again for including me here.
Of course, thank you. And I just want to give a personal shout out to Tom. He is joining us from the airport. That is dedication. So greatly appreciate you showing up. Catherine?
I thought, Tom, you were, what is that, San Francisco, New York, whatever campus you're on, your background. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine, she, her pronouns. I'm the senior manager at General Assembly for our operation in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I'm actually this moment in Seattle, Washington, but I've been in Riyadh for the last 2 years. And then I'm also the program manager for GA's ERG program. So I work closely with Tom as one of our exec sponsors. I'm also a member of the Inclusion Committee, which is our company's kind of DE&I advisory board. And this month I read The Body is Not an Apology, which if people haven't read, I highly recommend. And I think for me, what was really resonated within that book is that radical self-love is something that we're born with. It's not something we learn. And I had never heard it phrased that way. And maybe some folks on this call are like, yeah, duh, Catherine, we've known that forever, but I didn't. And I think that how that relates to Pride Month is that we're taught over time to kind of bury that radical self-love. And then we're also taught how to body shame and shame others in general for their inner beings and their true selves. And we reinforce that all the time, consciously and subconsciously. And so I think what I took away from that is that, working on myself to uncover my radical self-love, but also creating space and a safety for others to do the same. And I think it's so important that that's what I took away from the book. So The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. It's quite wonderful.
It is a good read, and that's a really great message to get during Pride Month. And then last but not least, Amber.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Amber Bradbury with Google. I'm our state program manager responsible for creating site leadership structure. I'm the executive sponsor for our culture and ERGs for the state. I spent the last decade plus helping to develop leadership teams and structures, and foundationally, it's all kind of been around our ERG and culture communities. So just really excited to be here. Pride moment, kind of in the same as Catherine, on some level, is I've just been doing a lot of internal reflecting on my own identity. As a bi woman, it took me a long time to come out, and I've had some interesting experience like many others along the way. And so just having a bit more conviction with that and owning it and learning about it and not having any shame around it, and helping others to do the same. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. We have such a phenomenal panel today. And really the bulk of this conversation, is not only about the ERG space and the ecosystem, but the importance of having sponsorship and working with the C-suite. So I'd love to start off with, the first question that's top of mind is, why is it important to have an executive sponsor or someone from the C-suite to champion your cause, and sort of tail end of that, like what does that involve when you're looking for this kind of sponsorship? And I'm going to start off with Neferiatiti. I'm going to make you first again today. What is that? How does that question resonate with you?
Well, it resonates with me because if you look at the approach, right, it's a top-down approach, and you are not able to sustain your efforts or even begin them without that sponsorship from the C-suite. And the ERG and DEI is everyone's responsibility. It is truly a group effort. So this is layman terms, but if you get the head, the body will follow, right? So with those efforts, it involves strategic planning, your ERG deck, all of your ideas and everything that's going to tie back into the business. And then that executive sponsorship will come from that. At the end of the day, yes, people want to get on the bandwagon finally, which is a great thing. We're getting to a better place. But at the end of the day, the C-suite wants to know, how is this going to affect my team members? How is it going to affect my business? And what's the return on the investment? So it's very important and it's crucial. It's essential. It's a step that you cannot skip. So definitely get them involved.
I love you saying that get the head and the body will follow. Alan, I would love to know your perspective on this question, especially seeing how you are an executive sponsor. Any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think there's a couple buckets here that are real benefits. One of them is access and visibility. So, the executives have access to the upper echelon of the company. They have FaceTime with the company officers and execs on just numerous occasions. You don't have to set up a separate meeting on this. You can pass them in the hallways and they're happy to talk to you about it, or you're already meeting with them on 5 other topics. This is one other thing. So as far as efficiently communicating, that's in there. Another one is visibility and influence over like a broad swath of employees. Because an exec sponsor has more visibility, he has a platform to talk to or to speak from, and he's generally got the attention of a broad set of employees. And as Neferiatiti said, it's setting a tone at the top that this represents the company culture. So if an exec sponsor embraces and talks to the values of the company being encapsulated in the DEI efforts, that follows down into the rank and file of the company. Another one is visibility of all these other goings on in the company that aren't really visible to everybody else. There are policy changes in flight. There's budget things, budget considerations and all that. So having an inside scoop on what's going on there can help that, ERG kind of navigate to the right endpoint when, all the die are cast in the company's decisions. The other access point is, if that exec sponsor is an officer of the company, then they have access to the board. And the board, as you know, is where everything really happens from the social responsibility aspect of the company. So being able to access the board can be really valuable, and accessing it or having an officer on board is super beneficial for that. One more thing is in like the experience. Typically, a executive level person is used to organizing and building structure, and they're action oriented. So they tend to try to get things done and then provide some accountability for closing out on those things.
I love that. I think those are all really, really great points. Yes, and just having access to those decision makers and being really streamlined in those communication pathways is important, and truly why having those sponsors in the room, part of these conversations, is essential. Well, I would love to know then, what are the questions you need to ask an executive to get them invested? It sounds great to have them, but how would you go about approaching an officer, approaching someone on the C-suite, and letting them know like this is important work? Noelle, let's start with you. Any thoughts around that?
I was actually fortunate enough to have some of our leadership come to me and say, how can we be better? And especially in 2020. But I think a lot of it has to do with empathy, with letting them know kind of where we're coming from, and also kind of asking them what their perceptions are. And I think often what we find is sometimes, individual contributors or people who are maybe more junior or not as senior in the organization, they don't have that kind of access to understand what our challenges are, what the obstacles are. So there is some some kind of reverse mentorship there. So if anything, maybe the start, is to ask them what their perceptions are, how familiar are they with the issues that we face. And at GPJ, our ERGs are based in constituents like LGBTQ, people of color and multicultural employees, women, parents, and caregivers. So we all have really distinct kind of experiences. And so maybe, the initial questions are just kind of opening up that conversation for to focus on the kind of human side of what's actually going on.
I love that. And it's really great to hear that, you actually had those sponsors reaching out and really wanting to step up and fill those spaces. With that, what does it look like to have accountability and make sure that that support has actually been given? Have you all sort of fleshed that out yet?
Yes. And so, that is regular check-ins. That is that time commitment of being able to continue those conversations week to week or however often it is, so that both sides can learn more about how one can help the other. So just as kind of Alan was saying, we as ERGs need the senior level perspective in order to present ourselves in a way that will be acceptable. And we're not trying to make enemies. We're trying to make friends. We're trying to get people on our side. So it is kind of that give and take of time, and having the conversations, really kind of doing the discovery each time we're talking in order to share more so that we can be allies to each other.
I love that. And I would love to sort of do the flip of that, Tom, as an executive sponsor, how was that journey for you stepping into that space? How were you approached or questions asked? Or it's pretty natural. I'm like not going to color too much, but I worked with Tom and he was already on board very easily. But could you give us a little bit of your perspective?
Well, yeah, a few things. I think, and I agree with all the comments that have been shared before. I think having really come from a nonprofit and advocacy background, I think, within the context of our business, the rationale was very clear to me. I think some of the things that we've experienced on our journey at General Assembly is how do we make sure that this is sort of baked into sort of every aspect of our business strategy, one, but two, also how do we make sure that we staff DEI efforts appropriately so that the work does not fall solely onto ERG leaders who, are essentially volunteering their time to provide additional resources. And I think, something that in all candor we saw at GA is we had a transition in leadership in terms of our DEI sponsor for the business, but also a CEO change, is that some of the work disproportionately fell to, our volunteer ERG leaders like Nicole and Catherine. And I think that they were able to, continue to perform at a very high level and deliver on that work despite those changes. But I do think the big risks are, how do you make sure that it's so baked into the ecosystem that leadership shifts are not going to cause dramatic disruption? But two, how do you make sure that it is staffed appropriately and the infrastructure is in place so that, people aren't just taking on a second full-time job in addition to what they're doing just because it's something that they're passionate about?
I appreciate that perspective. And I think that's a really good way to have that accountability is this just going to be foundational? And, those check-ins, as Noelle said as well. So what I would love to know is, from the leaders or those who have built the ERGs and are, sort of fleshed out these partnerships with executives, how could your conversations with execs help you understand where you need to go with your ERG? Amber, I would love to hear from you on this question.
Yeah, over the years, just building different ERGs, everything from our pride groups to a sober group. There's always been, like Tom said, these amazing volunteers that have these incredible passions and want to do. So it's helping to, for me, it's always been helping to amplify that and really pull that energy and bring it into the site leadership conversation. and be that channel and help to be that channel for that back and forth. We try to do a lot of listening sessions over the last, we haven't done as good a job at Google over the last year doing these, but we're trying to do them more. We're getting our site leadership to sit down with the ERG leaders and to hear what's top of mind for them, particularly as we kind of transition from this virtual to in-person again, and how that can show up so that we're ensuring that it's an equitable space for everyone, regardless of the medium in which you're in. You know, I think a lot of what we need to do as leaders is to do more around creating that channel, creating that voice, but also setting the governance a bit. You know, not to be all hierarchical, but to Alan's point and Noelle and Tom, like we are that centralized point of that top-down comms. Like we know when big communications are going to hit the company, and we need to help our ERGs understand why. Because if they don't know why and can't have that connection with us, then they're going to be the ones where their communities are reaching out to them to help get that information. And so we really need to be that tie. There has to be that connection, or we'll fail. If your culture fails, your business will fail. And I'm a true believer that ERGs are foundational to our culture. They're foundational to our business from a retention and recruitment strategy. And so I'm just a big believer in ensuring that you have those channels, regardless of the size of your organization, of your team. I think it was somebody earlier said it definitely takes everyone. It's not one person's responsibility for a company to be successful, and ERGs are important for that.
No, I love that and wholeheartedly agree. Oftentimes that is what happens when there's disruptions or, you know, needs in the company. Those communities draw to those leaders in those spaces, and you need the partnership with the C-suite and those executives to confidently own those conversations. Catherine, I'd love to get your insights on this questions too. Like, how could your conversations with exec help you understand where you need to go with your ERG or ERGs overall, since, you know, you oversee the 7 ERGs at GA?
Yeah, Amber, I definitely agree with everything you said. I think that there's one thing I would add, which is I think that execs can also help really dig into where ERGs are uniquely positioned to impact those those initiatives. So perhaps, you know, Tom, working with our LGBTQIA+ ERG, is going to focus on a different thing than, you know, our Black ERG may, or the Asian ERG, right? And so I think that those conversations help get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of like, how can we really understand which ERG is best fit to impact which initiatives or to drive which kind of business goals. Not that they don't all connect and they don't all drive to the same kind of goal points, but like every ERG might have a slightly different, unique position to impact those. So I think in those conversations, you're able to get really specific, you know, at General Assembly, and I think in a lot of places around the US, around the world, you know, ERG leaders and ERG members obviously aren't compensated for their work. And so like Tom mentioned, you know, being really able to scope folks too, I think I would probably bet that the group of us in this call are very passionate and very much willing to take on second jobs to get this work done. Like, we're there for it, but that's not sustainable. So I think being able to scope that is super important. I think those conversations between ERGs and execs also happens there, the scoping to say, what can we really feasibly do with our team, with our time, with our resources, and still make big impact? And how can every group do that so that our overall impact is bigger, right? And how do we integrate that into the business so that it's a part of our everyday and not just something else to check off of our checklist?
I love that, and that uniquely positioned. I saw a lot of heads nod on that. I think that's a really good phrase there. And it really makes me think of the next question, and really sort of tying back in, Noelle, you said a comment of, you know, we're not the enemy, we're working together. You know, how, and I'll start with you, Noelle, since you sort of phrased it that way. You know, how do you navigate those dynamics between the ERGs and the C-suite and execs? You know, those usually, a way I think of it, it's like the activists, the people who are passionate, And then, executives are there, they are business minded, they are thinking about, what is the bottom line?
Yep.
How do you navigate those dynamics?
It's definitely education, first of all, because leaders are always kind of data driven. And so whether it's by storytelling or, pure data of showing them like news articles or what have you, they're paying attention to all of that. And I think especially in 2021, post-pandemic, talent retention is huge. So they are so in tune with how do we keep folks feeling confident in the business, but confident in the leadership too. So I think understanding that this is not just an advocacy play, but this is really representation for the human resources that build our agency, that keep the creativity flowing. So definitely positioning it in a way that they're able to understand, and so meeting them where they are. I think for a lot of the ERGs, we have a lot of that information. What we don't have is exactly how to navigate the maybe business space and that culture of business, and how to Alan's point, get this message in front of the board and kind of present it that way. So the sooner that you can make your executive sponsor really feel like a part of the team, and again, whether that's including them in meetings, featuring them and asking them, how do they identify in these groups? Like a lot of our leaders are parents or caregivers, so they have that experience, and we do have women leaders, et cetera. So being able to spotlight them and actually put them into the light of, the lens that we're kind of coming at this work with. Again, it's a human experience. So bringing it back to that is really, I think, the essence of it. But again, it's relating. How do we relate to these folks who are so data driven and they do have this plan for the organization? So how can we help them bring the message to the audiences that they're in front of?
I love that. Tom, would you like to present the executive side of how to navigate those dynamics?
Yeah, sure.
Oh no, did we lose him? You may have, like I said, he's in an airport. Okay. Alan, do you have any thoughts on this as an executive?
Yeah, I do. Unless Tom pops back in.
Oh, Tom's back.
Are you back, Tom?
I'm so sorry, everyone. I would just say very briefly, I think the challenge is, as leaders, we need to hold our peers accountable for their own commitment to, staying engaged and involved in support of the work of the ERGs. I also think that there's a really important role where we have to play translator role, both up and down, to help ensure that the team feels really informed and empowered about other factors that may be going on in the business, but also that the leaders are really hearing what the sort of dynamics are on an individual basis. And I think, the challenge always, I think, with the ERGs is figuring out what are the sort of the proactive and sort of strategic things that we want to drive towards that are both sort of about sort of business and company policy, right, around things like family leave, for example. But also, how do we think about just building community and connection with people, right? While also being available in those moments where an issue arises and there needs to be a response. I mean, I think very specifically, for example, our HR system was not very accommodating to pronouns for non-binary folks, right? And so we had some issues with individual employees who were saying, this is a problem, right? We got to fix it. And we were able to triage and troubleshoot. But I think being able to, as a leader, you need to be able to sort of manage up, manage down, and also help the team to sort of think about both those proactive pieces, the community building pieces, and to sort of support in real time when issues arise. And that can be a lot to juggle. And so that's why I think also, recognizing the sort of the time commitment and investment that's required to be present and be supportive is absolutely critical. And apologies for my spotty Wi-Fi.
No, you're great. Like I said, we're also impressed that you're on the call at the airport. And I think those are really insightful answers. And it really makes, you both sort of touched on this, but what do you see as the business case for ERGs? I heard family leave and making these decisions. So I would actually like to send this one to Neferiatiti. What do you see as the business case for ERGs?
Well, we're human, right? So it's human work. And at the end of the day, people forget that we're not robots. So the business case for it, to Amber's point, is that there's an opportunity to increase engagement, value, retention, and just overall development, to be the voice, to the executives, so they can find out what's really going on, that they're not assuming everyone who feels this way or has this need. You're hearing straight from the people that represent people. And to Alan's point, the visibility, right? We have that visibility and that support, and it's crucial to the understanding to the full benefits of ERGs. And at the end of the day, communication is essential in all levels of the organization. If you don't communicate, then without culture, then you don't have a business. If you don't have a business, you don't have money. And then at the end of the day, you don't have people. So the business case can go on and on for ERG, but ultimately it's for the people to make a difference, to feel valued, to be recognized, to be engaged. And at the end of the day, if they stay, you have the retention, you have happier employees, you have happier customers, and they spend more money, which is the reason why we're in business, right? But everyone gets what they need. Everyone else is edified and fed that way. So that is what I feel the business case is for ERG.
I love that. Everybody's happy and fed. I have so many gems I'm going to take away from this call. Alan, I would love to hear your perspective on that. What do you believe the business case are for ERGs?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to build on Nefertiti's, very thoughtful answer there. But I'm also going to preface it with, some notes I had from some conversations I had with my company's officers. And the funny thing was, they don't look at it through a, transactional lens. It's not, what is this ERG getting to my business? They're really looking from the long-term strategy. They're looking at decades down the line. Where are our people going to be? They recognize that the most important, vital engine for the company is the people. So there's a strong focus on just doing the right thing for the people. And that means they can recruit more successfully. They can access a bigger pool of talent if they're recruiting in the right areas. They can retain people. It's really great if your company culture is such that you're advertising, you embrace diversity, and that makes everybody feel included and be more productive, be more innovative, come up with more robust solutions, and essentially want to stay and continue to bring the energy to the organization. And the other thing that was surprising to me is that there's not a recognition that stuff is measurable. It was kind of described as intangible benefits to the company. But in my perspective, these things are very measurable. You can measure recruiting. You can measure retention. You can measure productivity. You can measure innovation. You can measure, as Neferiatiti was talking about, the output from your organization and how it manifests in the market, and it shows up in your market numbers. So I think all those things, the benefits and the measurability of those benefits are a really great way to sell the business case for an ERG.
I love that. Perfect. Well, I feel like we got a lot of really good gems, and I would just love to know, if you are leading your own ERG, what would you hope for or expect execs or the C-suite to assist you with? Amber, I would love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, I'd say a partnership in creating OKRs. Like, what are our combined objectives? What are those key results we want to accomplish as a team, and really getting their buy-in on what that is. And it really should be a partnership. ERGs don't, need to create their strategy around the broader business strategy, and the broader business needs to create their strategy around what the ERG's experience is and what they're hearing. And so it really needs to be a collaborative process. And it's not just to, put some accountability from an OKR perspective. I think oftentimes that's just kind of like, it could be well, there's lots of perspectives on that. You do have to walk the walk. So it's not just meeting your objectives, but it's actually, being a model as an executive and modeling that behavior. And but yeah, I lately there's a lot of conversation, and Casey's on this call here from Google and it's what are the site leads OKRs, and how can we tie in the site leads OKRs and make them align with our ERG OKRs and vice versa. And so that just takes a lot of communication, more touch points. And kind of to the point earlier around, these folks are volunteers. This is their kind of 20% job. And so, from an ERG side, ERGs going in, talking to executives, knowing the landscape in which we're operating, what resources do we have to do the work, and having some grace in whatever way that looks like, because every organization is going to be different based on how they're structured. And so it's that tight bond that needs to be created.
I love that. And I appreciate everyone, sort of touching on, like, this is usually volunteer work on top of already full plates. So I think just keeping that in mind, and when you're doing your partnerships. I know we want to go to Q&A, but right before we do that, want to just get one more panelist thoughts on this last question of really, what would you expect out of those sponsors? And even circling back around on what the business case may be. I think those two questions are really tied together. So let's end with Catherine. Do you have any sort of closing thoughts on these final parts?
Yes. I think that I think a lot of what y'all said about the business cases for ERGs just gets me really excited. But I think one of the points that I just want to stress that Alan kind of mentioned is that more long term, because I think that ERGs are not really about like a quick deliverable or a project, right? And I know for GA, Nicole and I kind of founded this group of 7 ERGs just last year. And there were other ERG attempts before GA that were kind of smaller, but Nicole and I kind of leaned in and said, we're going to do this. And got the buy-in of a lot of folks in the organization to make it happen. And so, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary, and, we're still figuring out a lot of things. And I think some of our ERG leaders are often looking back and saying, well, what have we done in the last 12 months? And sometimes they kind of get discouraged because they're high achieving individuals. But I think that we're only a year in, and so where those impacts, we can still measure them, we still see them, but I think the impact of, the ERG work, we're going to be able to see exponentially grow over the next several years. So I think that business cases for ERGs too need to be thought of as organizational time length, not a quarter or 2 quarters or whatever, but really thinking more, how their impact is over time. And I know that as businesses, we often think about our Q1, our 1H, our 2H, our yearly, like we're thinking right in these terms, but I think ERGs have a much broader impact over time. And then as for what to hope to expect from execs, I think the only thing I would add, and that we're super fortunate that our exec leaders at General Assembly do a really good job of this, is just some kind of mentorship for our leaders. Our ERG leaders are these high achieving individuals who are taking on this work because they believe in it, and they're still crushing it every day in their jobs, that they're full-time kind of positions. And I think there's a great opportunity for those leaders who are stepping up to do this work to gain some professional development, and learning about how to make strategic decisions, how to think like an executive, how to do simple things, kind of not so simple, I guess, but time management, organizational skills at that higher performing level. And I think that mentorship is such a huge value, especially for ERG leaders, to work with our execs. And that's something that we at GA talk about with our exec sponsors, is that mentorship for the leaders. And that is a benefit in a sense that those leaders get, even though we're not compensating them financially. And so I think that that's something else I would add. But other than that, I think everything else mentioned was spot on.
I love that. And those are some really great, excellent points to sort of tie it all together. So with that, would love to open this up for everyone else. I've been able to hog our panelists and ask some really great probing questions. So please, in the chat function, feel free to ask a question that you have. I'm pretty informal, like you can also just come off mute if you like. But to kick us off, I do believe I saw a question earlier from Samantha. So I'll start with this. Is there anyone here that is part of an organization that does reward and recognize ERG leaders? And I'm assuming maybe we're thinking compensation or some kind of tangible way that they're being recognized. Anyone on the panel or in the audience?
I'm happy to chime in here as somebody who has done ERG work in my career for a long time, and it's often the unrewarded. So for the last I don't know 4 years, just trying to create a Culture and Respect Award program, which we have at Google, and just most of the time it's always the ERG leads who get the nominations. But even if it's not, I ensure that we are doing that learning and development reward. Like, it's a reward to be able to get exposure to a leadership Austin or a leadership XYZ city, right? Some sort of additional leadership development. So we've been really trying to uplift our ERG leads, because we know that this is sometimes thankless work, but it's the most important work. We have an additional peer-to-peer bonus system structure where peers can give another employee a bonus for their work, kind of above and beyond their core work that they're doing for the company. But I think as executives, we have got to create these additional ways of highlighting, whether it's an email shout out for somebody who's doing something great, or some other way of amplifying them as leaders, so that they too can get that brand that they are these up and coming leaders, those folks that we want to be sitting next to us on the bench one day.
And Nicole, I would add another thing there. From Silicon Labs perspective, the ERG leaders aren't in any way compensated for that, but all the executives have part of their compensation plan is tied to execution of DEI, measurable DEI achievements throughout the year. So that's very much accountability oriented and measurement oriented response by the company to actually achieve concrete results in their DEI initiatives.
And just to add, one thing that we were able to do at GPJ is at the beginning of the year, leadership gave us billable hours and a budget to actually execute an ERG event for the entire organization. So all 4 of our ERGs created an event called Voices, in which we wanted to amplify the voices of everyone in the ERGs. And we were able to actually create an award called the Joji Award. So it was the Joy of Joining In Award. And it didn't go to one of our ERG leads, but it was a very important member of our ERG, or of a couple ERGs, Leah Hoshi. But we were able to just highlight her as an employee who has volunteered her time and made a huge impact by donating her time and skills to the organization. And this is something that we're planning on doing annually. So I think it was a lot of recognition and reward, the fact that we could have billable time, that we could create something internal for the organization, but also that we could also present an award to someone to recognize it. So doing this year over year, again, kind of builds the brand of ERGs, builds the brand of, joining in. So, yeah.
I love that. And I love that you all touched on like other ways. This doesn't always have to be monetary. While we will all love it to be, it's just sometimes these are businesses. And there are things that as an exec could tell you, like maybe we really just don't have the budget for it now. So there are other ways to show value and acknowledge people's contributions. I know at General Assembly, we created different initiatives, the DEI Champion of the Month, really showcasing and uplifting people in ways that make them feel seen and valued. So I loved hearing all of that. And then I see I have 2 more questions here. One from JP. Looks like they are looking to start ERGs. Great. Do you have any other suggestions on getting it started, buy-in from executive management, or any resources that can help me get this going? I will come back to that because the answer is yes. And then do you have any recommendations, this is from Michael, for creating expectation guidelines for executive sponsors, i.e. time and sponsorship roles and things of that nature? Let's do Michael's question because JP, I believe your question will be a really good wrap up here. So anyone want to jump in on, do you have any recommendations for creating the expectation guidelines for executive sponsors? I will throw it at Catherine because I did this with you. So I think you can speak to how you navigated this quickly.
Yes. Yeah, so and Tom since is on our exec sponsorship team, so this will be a great partner on this one. But as I mentioned, we kind of founded this program about a year ago, and we did Nicole and I kind of took a first swing at defining what those expectations were. So we did go ahead and put pen to paper on, you know, how many meetings kind of per month and what that rough hourly was. And the reason, you know, I'd honestly have to look at our slide deck to remember the exact amount. But the reason I'm kind of, and I think every organization is different, right? I think that we said about one team meeting a month. And I think we said, you know, a couple of hours a week, kind of averaging out that way. But I think what is important is that you do set those expectations. We also define the roles. We put things in like learning and development, mentorship for leaders. We put things in like advise on business initiatives and strategic decision making, right? So we did get clear about what those buckets were that the exec sponsors were kind of responsible for. And then, as Tom mentioned, we went through a leadership change. So we have a new CEO who's just about to hit her first year. We also went through some senior leadership team changes. And so in that process, we had to rethink what that was going to look like, because we could maybe no longer have one exec for one ERG for the time being as we were going through that transition. So what we did then was we just called all the execs into a room, magically got them all into a room for 45 minutes, which is amazing if you're talking about 7 senior executives. And we kind of talked with them. We asked a lot of questions. We took a lot of notes, and we rethought what that would look like for our team for the time being. So that's a very anecdotal way of saying you should set guidelines. But I do think that if you have expectations, Michael, for what those guidelines are, go ahead and set them, and then check in with your executives. And then you can partner with them to make those adjustments. But I think that, you know, if you have certain expectations, go ahead and set them and then check in, and always be open to tweaking them. I think it's okay to make changes to your program as it grows and develops, and you need to be okay. Everybody has to be okay working in partnerships with their execs to make that happen.
I love that. So essentially, in short, sort of create a job description, expectations when you're in the role, expecting them to either change ERGs, filter through them all, really make sure that there's that growth and development, and getting familiar with other communities that they may not be initially so comfortable or drawn to, because this is about growth and opportunity as well. So perfect. And I would love here, Rachel, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am.
What I think would be great is we sort of wrap up, if you could speak to JP's question, and I think that'll be a good wrap up for us.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And thank you all so much. Just want to send deep appreciation to all the panelists and to you, Nicole, for being a moderator extraordinaire. This dialogue was so powerful, and I'm just so grateful. And so I have a long answer for you, JP, but the short answer is come to our next ERG committee meeting on July 21st. We are at the Chamber hosting monthly convenings. It's the third Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And we're really wanting to create an ecosystem of folks in ERGs at every level, because we believe it's kind of like the rising tide lifts all boats, right? When ERG leaders and members come together and share best practices and share challenges and problem solve together, the ripple effect of this work is so significant. And so definitely invite you to join us. And you can also, we would be happy to talk with you offline, because we have developed, the ERG lead team developed what we call the ERG Builders Box, because so many folks like you, JP, are just starting out and needing some resources to get the foundations in place and to really kind of develop the strategy. And so we'd be happy to talk with you about that, that resource, because we want to make sure that you feel set up for success. So definitely a lot more coming. Let's stay connected. And if folks want to drop if you're open to connecting on LinkedIn, you're welcome to put your LinkedIn link into the chat box if you want folks to connect with you there. No pressure, but that's like a new thing that I'm seeing folks do at the end. And then JP, thank you for that question. Let me go ahead and put the link. It is open to the public. It's also found on our chamber website. So I'm going to put that in the chat box as well for you, JP. Anybody can come. We'd love to see all of you there. Actually, it's a growing, developing team of a committee that is truly welcome to anybody on ERG. So looking forward to that. And let's see, thank you. I think that just about wraps. Heather, Casey, anybody else have closing words before we close out? It's just been such a pleasure. I have learned so much in this session.
I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody for participating. This is fantastic, great ideas and a wealth of experience from different types of companies and organizations. And this is the sort of conversation that we can kind of get new ideas, tweak ones that we've had in process. And I think there's a great benefit. So thank you all.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing as well. Like, really appreciate all the panelists taking time out of their day. I know you're busy, especially to take an hour to sit and share all of your learnings and experiences with people, because ultimately, like, our goal at the Chamber of Commerce is really to help establish more ERGs across Austin and the greater Austin area, and ensure that employees, no matter what company you're at, feel welcomed at work and feel like they have a place to belong and can do great work and help Austin grow at the end of it all. So you've helped propel that mission forward. And so I just want to say thanks for participating and being here today.
And I'd like to say just everyone to stay encouraged. This is not always the job or the task for the faint at heart. You know, remember, we're planting seeds for someone to sit in the shade later. And you never see a tree grow overnight, but there's going to be so many people that thank us for the work that we're doing. And so just stay diligent and take your deep breaths, go on a walk. This is making a huge difference. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take good care, everyone.